Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Chapter 16 of A Call from the Stars, A Call to Arms. Point of View. First Lieutenant Sin, Orbital Drop Fleet. Well, it took us several months after that first engagement to get ready, but boy, we didn't have to worry about getting any support from back home. When they saw that leaked video, they were just as pissed as the rest of us. I guess no alien species around the entire cosmos besides us realizes you don't go after kids, asshole. Regardless, I had to calm my guys down a little bit. They wanted a piece of the action so bad, I actually had to turn down people from joining. It was quite interesting. Since this is my first time in the officer's chair, we'll see how it goes. When we got ready for the actual jump into enemy controlled territory, we were already strapping into our pods. The new pods we have were outfitted not single seat, but no, they were set up for 4 people each, so it took a little longer for us to get in. All 4 sides, we were locked in, and we'd be launched down in one large group. This was so that the enemy couldn't actually find us on their radar. There'd be too many of us for their anti-missile systems or anti-capital ship or whatever system they've got going on down there to actually take us out. Not to mention, once we actually get through the atmosphere, the outer edge bursts off, leaving a huge trail of debris. I think they got that from a book somewhere, but I'll have to look that back up one day. From what we could tell, this is going to overload their radar, so they won't be able to get a good lock on us. Good thing, too, because once we get close to the ground, the pull that comes out of there from when the chutes open up, oh man, you think your brains went down into your butthole. As we're strapped in, we look a lot like those toys when they're wrapped up in foam. You can't move, you can't see anything. All you got is your HUD. And on your heads up display, all you have is comms chatter and status checks on your guys, and that's about it. It's completely quiet. As we're getting ready to drop, I can actually hear a few guys get a little sick because they didn't know what they were in for. But still, the look in their eyes said, I want a piece of these bastards. Well, they're going to get a whole lot more than a piece. Once we got into our pods, we could always tell when things were happening, even before the communications officer got a hold of us. We could tell when we jumped out of FTL space and into our own. That was a heck of a jerk, especially if you're pointed in the wrong direction. Your forehead just about smacks the front of your helmet, but you're still locked in position, so basically your guts are bouncing around. That's not fun. Then the Corvette that flies us in detaches from the main ship. And boy, the acceleration off those things, I really wish they would warn us. I swear, just like back in the day, those pilots just enjoy shaking us around just for the shits and giggles of it. But when you get close, you can hear the mechanism opening underneath you, and you know it's time to go. You're given a countdown, roughly time out, and then this typical red light. And that son of a bitch is looking you square in the face. And you're thinking, oh, geez. From the time of the green light turning on to the time you're released is less than a second. So you better hope your butt doesn't actually go up into your brains at that point. Thankfully, the release isn't too bad. You're not actually shot out the bottom. You don't have to be. The gravity well of the planet does all the work for you. Now, when the thrusters kick in to actually push you towards where your LZ is going to be, that's a bit different. And you feel that jostle you around as you go down. And I'll tell you what, I don't care who you are. It's a good thing the microphones are off because you are cursing up a storm as the anti-aircraft fire. You can hear in-atmosphere aircraft go whipping past you. Sometimes you can't tell if it's them or a missile, or sometimes the occasional pop, pop, pop of some sort of ballistic bouncing against the side of your hull. Usually those are ours. The enemy still does not like ballistics, at least not that we understand them as well. However, as you're coming in, you actually get the altimeter looking at you, and you're just like, oh crap, here we go. And all you can say at that point is prepare for the ouch. So you feel the chutes open, and then all of a sudden is that opening shock as it slows you down for about 10 seconds before your pod hits the ground. When the pod hits the ground, all four doors, they don't lower like you see in the video games. Oh, no, no, no. They launch and they fire about a good 50 feet straight forward. This is a safety concern because it takes about 3 seconds for us to actually get out of our harnesses and grab our weapons. This is more to make sure that the enemy isn't turned and looked at us. They're more concerned with dodging this huge piece of metal that just went flying past them. With practice proficiency, my men got moving to where they needed to be. We had 3 different landing zones we had to take care of and make sure they were clear for our shuttles to actually come down and bring the heavier guns. And I can tell you this, the enemy figured that out real quick and they were not happy. On the way to my first LZ, I got a good look at a few of these things, and I'll tell you what, they're nightmare fuel incarnate. As a quick description of the sniffs, our enemy, they stand anywhere from 12.5 to 16 feet tall. 4 legs that are spread out like spider legs, but thick as tree trunks. You'd swear they were part elephant. They didn't come to a point by any means, which is why we could always hear them coming with a thump, thump, thump that they made. These things were heavy, large, with several layered carapaces up their dorsal and ventral sides. Their head was squished into the body. It was hard to actually make out a movable neck. No eye stalks, but the eyes were affixed forward, strictly like that of a predator. All 4 of them. On either side, you could see their 6 additional appendages, 2 of which were manipulators with 4 fingers on each. 2 were clearly meant for offensive because they looked straight out of something a praying mantis would have. These massive, massive blades, which I really did not want to test against my armor. And then 2 additional appendages, which we found out were the only way to really tell the males and females apart. The male's appendages were longer and looked more like a tail, actually, and the other ones were wider and were designed to accept the tail. So I'll just leave that. So those were kept mostly to the side, but needless to say, when they got desperate, they'll use anything to beat the crap out of you. Our new suits were great that we were able to actually go at them at full speed, and our new weapon systems cut through them like crazy. What amazed us was the fact that they barely had any energy weapons in hand, and they had absolutely no ballistic weapons. They tried to take us on hand to hand, and it actually made my guys laugh. I'm not even joking. I can hear guys laughing and taking bets on how many each of them get and who's fighting over which kill. These things would come running at you from 50 to 100 meters away, and our guys would just cut through them like they weren't there. That being said, you only have so much ammo, and these things knew it. They also knew they were fighting for the planet once we were on the ground. So they came at us in groups, and as large as they were very, very mobile. These things could jump sideways, up, down, left, right, and center, made it very difficult to get a bead on them. As they ran through the forest, it was even more difficult as our rounds would reflect off the trees and the rocks and anything else they could hide behind as they zigzagged through the forest. That didn't stop my men from taking them down piecemeal. And when I mean piecemeal, I mean literally. In several cases, I would see one laying on the ground missing all its arms and legs and still be sitting there trying to bite at you. Boy, these things were mean. Our translator finally was able to catch up to them, and we could hear them actually giving orders to each other. So there was some sort of military understanding on what to do. The only problem is for them, they didn't stop. Once they engaged, they just came at you. The closest I can say was back before I was around. the war in Korea, where they would just come at you in sheets, more and more and more. They wouldn't stop. They just wouldn't stop. There's just more of them. And they came out like roaches out of a tunnel. And yes, they did have tunnels, and sometimes they just popped out of the ground. I'll say a few guys were joking how they almost shit themselves, how these things just jumped up. Unfortunately, because of this, we started taking some casualties. And the casualties were mean. It didn't take long for the enemy to figure out that the joints were the weak spots in our armor. Our armor was strong enough it could take several, at least a half a dozen hits from those giant blades they have. But that wasn't going to stop the kinetic force as it launched you sideways, or down, or back, or whichever way they hit you. The manipulator arms were very long and very strong. In one case, I saw one of my platoon sergeants get actually pushed down, and he was being held down by both arms as this thing was trying to hack at his helmet with its bladed arms. It would have been scary if it wasn't for the fact that less than a second later, two of his subordinates blew this thing in half, and I quite literally mean in half. As it turns out, our weapons, if used in tandem, can actually bust through the center carapace of these things. When we finally reached our LZ, it was hard to hold the area, but we still called down air support to make sure that we could keep them back long enough to get our big weapons down. I give serious props to the pilots having to go through all that crap to get to the ground, just to drop off a couple of heavy weapons and then run back up to space just to get more. We owe our lives to those guys because we were starting to run low. I even had to extinguish my flamethrower. It wasn't very good except for close quarters, but let's face it, you run out of rifle rounds, you have to do what you can do. The enemy did not like the flamethrower. However, they could fight through the pain if it was just you, which made us very, very nervous. I'm going to have to tell my chain of command about that and ask for something a little more sticky and napalmish, maybe a little Willie P along with it. When we finally secured the LZ and got another round of shuttles coming down, we had to load our wounded, which were beginning to mount as these things just would not stop coming. Eventually, we got enough heavy weapons on the ground we can keep them at range, and they seem to hold off and retreat to their, if you want to call, a city. It wasn't very big, about the size of a small town, but the buildings were massive. That was our next objective. As we moved on to the city, more of them tried to ambush us. Unfortunately, they started making gains in that respect. I had to watch several of my men die screaming as they got impaled, as these frickin' sniffs figured out that if they came up to the side and aimed for the joints, they could actually get underneath the main armor. It was not fun to watch at all. When we finally caught one alive that had actually killed one of our guys, I personally walked up and said, "No prisoners," as I blew the bastard's head apart. I was done with them now. Reaching the city, we realized we had just got through the easy part. As anyone can tell you, moving through urban terrain is not easy, especially when it's non-human terrain and you don't know where what is. Is that a window? Is that a door? Is that a ceiling? Is that a floor? I don't know. So we had to go and move room by room, street by street, level by level, clearing everything out. More than once I had to stop and call for another resupply and to get our wounded out. Thankfully, another one of the platoons caught up to us and we were able to keep going. When we finally reached towards the center of their city, we received one of the biggest shocks ever. Now, I had told them to go in and destroy anything with more than 2 legs. But as soon as I started hearing calls for the platoon sergeant and myself, I ran over and we received again a hell of a shock. To my absolute surprise, we found a different species. We didn't know if these were a different type of our enemy or not, so I told my men to hold fire. Thankfully, the platoon sergeant had told them that before I even got there. This new species was strictly reptilian in nature, bipedal, 2 arms, 2 legs, a tail, but clearly it was evolved from some sort of lizard. I couldn't tell what. And if my distinction is anything to go by, they were exclusively female. But this made sense considering what they were doing. They were tending to the enemy's eggs and their hatchlings. We had actually made it into the center of the hive, and we didn't even realize it. Now, the enemies don't have a queen. These were of different mates across their entire planet. It's something they do. They just bring all their eggs to one spot and they hatch at the same place. I'm not sure why, and our technicians, our linguistics, nobody can figure it out. Eventually, we were able to get them to speak, even they were scared of us and didn't want to speak. Especially when I lifted up my visor so they could see my face. I'm assuming that was a scream of terror because it backed away, but my ears couldn't decipher it. Thankfully, once they started speaking and I called for an extra interpreter, they were able to actually figure it out. And when I mean they, I mean the AI was able to figure it out. Thankfully, once they did, we realized what was happening. It was another slave species. These slaves were being used as nursemaids. We asked if there was any more across the planet. They said yes. And we found out really quick that any one of these towns, any one of the cities will always have at least one of these hatching facilities. Well, that made everybody go into overtime, especially when we found out there was another set of slaves. We don't do slaves. That is a human constant. It's been that way for a long, long time. We told them they would be free, but apparently they had been slaves so long they didn't understand the concept. Thankfully, when we told them that they just had to follow us and we would feed them and house them and get them back to their families, they followed us. Then again, I'm pretty sure that was more to their programming as slaves for their entire lives. When we finally got them back to the aid station, they were checked out and come to find out they were all very malnourished. I looked at a little closer and I remembered one of my roommates having lizards as pets, and I realized something I should have realized sooner. Most lizards keep nutrients in their tails. These lizards, their tails were almost rat tails. They were so thin, they weren't bulky or built out like a lizard's tail should be. So immediately we tried to figure out what they eat, and it's not surprising that they preferred protein sources. Well, we got them as much as we could to make sure they wouldn't make them sick, but I still had areas to clear. I left just as the medics were handing over food to each of them, and of course water. And these slaves just started scarfing it down and actually begging for more. When I put that out across the net, along with the company commander and everyone else, there was a new round of rage to the sniffs. Everyone wanted them dead, and it was all I could do not to allow them to torch the egg center. That hatchery had to stay. We don't kill kids. What would be taking care of them? That's not my concern. My concern was securing this planet. So I called my men together. We found out what our next objective would be, and we moved out. I would like to say the rest of the mission went off just as clean, but not even close. As soon as the enemy found out that we were rescuing the slaves from them, they went into asset denial and they started killing them off. Apparently, that was going to be their new food source while they waited for us to come into their dens. It was another scene out of a horror movie as we cleared an area and found nothing but these lizards, at least what was left of them. Bones broken, meat stripped off, blood all over the place. And it wasn't just the nursemaids. They had eaten the young, these bastards. I looked at my men, I said, "We're done being nice." I backed them out of that area and I called in every piece of support I could get. When they asked why they should drop that much ordnance, I showed them the video feed from my suit. After about 30 seconds, I was ordered to back up because this explosion was going to be big. They weren't kidding. It would be the first time I've ever seen a shot fired from orbit. But it wasn't just one. Every ship that could fire a shot fired at least one round. Either it was a rod of tungsten, a missile, a torpedo, or one of those new high-focus laser weapons they got. There was nothing left of that city except a crater. A glowing crater covered in melted glass. There was no cheers from my men. There was only anger. I looked over at my platoon sergeants and said, "We got work to do." Things would get worse from there. It would become worse because we found out it was not only the lizards, but our new allies, the PZ, were there and they were being slaughtered. Not just slaughtered, but they would be slowly torn apart, and their screams for help would echo inside our helmets, just daring us to come and try to save them. As for someone who cares for one deeply, it was all I could do not to run in there and tear every snip a new one, but I knew it was an ambush. What could I do? But I didn't have to make that choice. Everyone, every human, it didn't matter. Soldier, pilot, medic, engineer, technician, they didn't care either. Now was the time to get the friendlies out. We are human. That is what we do. And we drove in with reckless abandonment as I saw two of my men get dropped to the ground by those massive blades. I was in the rear of the stack, unfortunately, as I saw more of those giant blades swing around, our ballistic weapons blasting out in every direction. Guys trying to throw in stun grenades, trying to get anything, stun, smoke. It didn't matter. They just kept coming, those bastards, those giant tunnels. They would just crawl up on the sides, coming at us from every single corner like fucking roaches. They would slash at us. They would pound at us with their extra appendages. They would kick us with those massive legs. I ended up down on my back, grabbing somebody else's weapon and firing right into another sniff as it came down and slashed into my leg. It pierced my armor, but it didn't go very deep, thankfully. I was able to get back on my feet, and what we found inside was not just sniff bodies. They had slowly torn the slaves apart. There were some on the ground, missing arms, missing legs, missing tails. Some of them were even eviscerated, others with huge bite marks missing out of them. It was something straight out of hell. But if they want hell, that is what they'll get. And I screamed that through the radio to the rest of my men. Some of them were even low on ammo. They didn't even care. They pulled out their blades and just kept going. The reckless abandonment, the sheer rage that permeated through that area made the sniffs hesitate. They didn't think that we would actually get through. They didn't think we would actually get to their center. They didn't think that we could beat them. And we did. I still don't know how many we killed. I do know the losses in my platoon were 28% casualties, 4% KIA. We carried them back to the ships so that we could take the bodies back to their families. But I did one thing that I hate doing, even though it's necessary. I took their dog tags and I put them in the letter that would be sent home. An old fashioned letter, not a telegram, not a mail, not anything else but an old fashioned letter which would be delivered by the chaplain himself or herself. This was going to be a long, long road. But to our surprise, we wouldn't fight it alone. As we were carrying out a few of our men, several of our new apparent allies came over and helped us carry their bodies. We looked at them, so weak from malnutrition. We couldn't believe that they were actually willing to help. They could barely lift the metal body of one of my men still in his suit, but they helped. Total collected around the entire globe, approximately 21,000 new lizard personnel and approximately 1,800, if not a little less, of the PZ, at least what was left of them. Though with everything going on, I can say this: our determination has not wavered one bit. If anything else, we're more determined because we're humans, and that's what we do.